Hey guys, welcome back to more entitled Neighbor Karen Reddit stories. In today's Ripestories video, imagine you're deployed thousands of miles from home and you get an emergency call. Not about your family, but your $1 million beach house. It is gone, burned to the ground. And the person responsible? It might just be your entitled neighbor next door. Let's find out what happened. And the first one is titled, Evil Neighbor Destroyed My $1 million beach house while I was deployed out of jealousy. So for some background, I am an active duty soldier and been in for over a decade now. I am not gonna say which branch or where I am stationed for obvious reasons, but my wife and I have 2 kids and for most of my career, we lived in pretty modest housing like most military families do. You move around, you rent, you live on base, you make it work, and here is where my story gets a little different. My grandfather owned a beach house. He bought the land way back when it was basically worthless, just dunes and scrub grass, and he built a small cottage on it with his own hands. Over the decades, that area blew up, and what used to be a sleepy little nothing town became one of those coastal areas where every house is worth a fortune. When my grandfather passed away, he left the house to me. By the time it came to me, between the land value and the renovations my grandpa had done over the years, the property was appraised at a little over $1 million. Now let me be clear, we were not rich, we were just a normal military family who suddenly had this one incredible asset, but it was my grandfather's house. I mean, I learned to fish off the dock behind it, and my wife and I got engaged on the back deck. So we decided we were gonna keep it no matter what, rent it out when we needed to, and eventually retire there. That was the plan, so enter the neighbor. I'm gonna call her Diane, and Diane lived in the house next door. She was maybe early 60s, lived alone, and from the literal first day we took ownership, she made it very clear she despised us. And I do mean the very first day. We pulled into the driveway with a moving truck and she was standing at the property line with her arms crossed like she was waiting for us. My wife, being the friendly person she is, walked over and introduced herself. Diane looked her up and down and said, "So you're the ones. I want you to know that house was supposed to be mine." My wife kind of laughed because she thought it was a weird joke. It was not a joke. It turns out, and we pieced this together over time from other neighbors, Diane had been trying to buy my grandpa's house for years. She would apparently show up at his door multiple times with offers. She wanted to knock down both houses and then build some massive kind of compound on the combined lots. My grandpa, who was the most stubborn man alive, told her no every single time, and apparently the last time she came around that he told her something along the lines of that he would rather burn it down than sell it to her. Keep that line in mind. It becomes horribly ironic later. So anyway, when my grandpa passed, Diane apparently assumed the family would just sell and she was ready to swoop in. Instead, the house went to me, some 30-something-year-old soldier with a wife and 2 loud kids, and we had the audacity to actually keep it. In her mind, we had stolen her dream property, and the first couple years were just petty stuff. I mean, she called the town on us constantly, our grass was too long for her, our trash cans were out too early, so on and so on. The town guy eventually got so sick of her calls that he told my wife, off the record, that they basically had a folder of Diane complaints and most of them went straight in the trash. By the way guys, I have a feeling that is exactly where Diane herself belongs as well. But maybe that's just me, maybe she turns out to be an angel. Diane screamed at our kids for being on the beach, which is public by the way, and one summer she put up this hideous spite fence right on the property line, like 12 feet of ugly wood just to block the side view from our kitchen window, and we didn't even fight it. We just planted some nice tall bushes on our side and moved on. That seemed to make her even angrier though, that we wouldn't engage with her. My wife is a saint and kept trying to keep the peace. She would wave, she would say good morning, and once she even brought over a plate of cookies after a hurricane scare, figuring, hey, we are neighbors, we should look out for each other when the weather gets bad. Diane took the plate, looked my wife dead in the eye, and dumped the cookies into the sand right in front of her. And yeah guys, if that is not a red flag, I don't know what is. Honestly, when dealing with a crazy neighbor like Diane, how would you proceed to deal with her? Also, if you still enjoy the neighbor stories about crazy entitled Karens, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post a comment, because it would help me tremendously. Thank you so much. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, because I post daily videos. Anyway, she handed the empty plate back and walked inside without a word. That was the moment we stopped trying. Things escalated slowly over the years. We would find our hose slashed, our outdoor shower handle went missing, and someone keyed a long line into my truck while it was parked in a driveway. However, we could never prove anything, but come on, there was exactly one person on Earth who hated us, and she lived like 40 feet away. One of the worst incidents happened this summer before everything went down. My son, who was around 10 at the time, left his bike leaning against our fence overnight, and in the morning, the bike was gone. 2 days later, it washed up on the beach, completely destroyed by salt water. Someone had literally thrown my kid's bike into the ocean. My son actually cried, and I'm not gonna pretend I handled my emotions like a monk that day. I walked over and knocked on her door. She opened it with this big satisfied grin, and before I could even say a word, she goes, "It's rough this time of year. Things wash away." I said, "You threw my son's bike in the ocean." "Prove it," she said, and closed the door in my face. That was the day I bought cameras. She knew about the cameras, obviously. I mean, they are visible, and for a while they actually worked as a deterrent. The vandalism stopped almost completely for about a year, and she went back to just glaring at us and filing complaints. I genuinely thought that we had reached some kind of Cold War stability, but then I got my deployment orders. I'm not gonna go into details about where or for how long, but it was a long one. My wife and I talked it over and decided that she and the kids would spend most of my deployment at her parents' place a few states away, because she would have help with the kids there, and honestly, neither of us loved the idea of her being alone next to Diane for that long. The beach house would sit empty for a stretch. We hired a local guy to check on it every couple of weeks, cut the grass and make sure no pipes burst, that kind of thing. But here's the part that still makes my blood boil. The week before I shipped out, we were loading up the car with the last of the stuff my wife was taking to her parents. Diane was outside watering her plants, watching us like she always did, and she called out across the yard, sweet as anything, "Going somewhere?" I ignored her. My wife, trying to be the bigger person one last time, said, "He's deploying, we will be away for a while." And by the way, guys, I would never tell that to a crazy neighbor. Let's be clear here. That is truly a big mistake. Anyway, I watched Diane's face when she heard that. I will never forget it. She just smiled, a big, slow smile, and she said, "Well, safe travels." My wife told me later she got chills from that. At the time, we just chalked it up to Diane being Diane. We had no idea that we just handed a deranged woman the exact piece of information she had been waiting for years. An empty house and an owner on the other side of the planet. Fast forward several months into my deployment, I'm doing my thing, calling home when I can, counting down the days, and then one night, well, night for me, I get pulled aside because there is an emergency communication from home. Any military family reading this knows the specific type of fear that hits you when you hear those words. My first thought was my wife, my kids, somebody got hurt. I get my wife on the line and she's crying so hard she can barely talk, and the first thing she manages to get out is, everyone's okay, but the house is gone." I said, "What do you mean gone?" "It burned. The beach house burned down. It is gone, honey. It's all gone." I just stood there, holding the phone. I remember asking the dumbest question like, was it the whole house? Like maybe only half of my grandpa's house had burned, and that would somehow be fine. She told me the fire department got the call in the middle of the night from a neighbor down the street, and by the time they got there, the house was fully involved. They saved Diane's house. Fun fact, they protected her house from the fire my house was producing. However, our place burned down to the foundation. I'm not ashamed to say I cried on that call. Guys in my unit were great about it, gave me space, but there's no worse feeling than something like this happening at home while you are physically incapable of doing anything about it. That helplessness ate me alive. But here's the thing, almost immediately things did not add up. The house had been winterized properly, power to most of the house was shut off at the panel, nothing was running, our caretaker guy had been there days earlier, and everything was fine. Houses don't just spontaneously combust though, and then I remembered my cameras. I genuinely don't know why it took me a few hours to remember, probably shock or something, but I remember sitting there in the middle of the night and it hit me like a truck. The cameras, even if they burned, the footage should be in the cloud, so I got to a computer as soon as I possibly could and logged into the camera account, hands shaking. There were a bunch of motion alerts from that night that I'd never seen before because of the time difference and where I was, and I opened the first clip. And there she was, Diane, in dark clothes but with her face plain as day because my driveway camera had night vision and she walked right past it. She wasn't even really trying to hide it, why would she? In her mind the house was empty and the owners were gone for months, and she was about to destroy the cameras along with everything else. She thought the evidence would burn with the house, and the footage was honestly chilling to watch. She walks around the house first, casual as anything, like she's taking a stroll. She tries the doors and then she goes back to her property and comes back a few minutes later carrying a gas can. She splashes it along the back deck, the same deck where I proposed to my wife, and around the base of the house. At one point, and this is the detail that haunts me, she stops and looks almost directly at one of the cameras and gives this little wave. She thought she was waving at a camera that was about to melt, and she was actually waving at a federal courtroom exhibit, but then she lit it. The last clear footage before the cameras died is the fire spreading along the deck and Diane standing back near the property line watching, just standing there watching my grandfather's house burn, completely calm. The cameras went down one by one as the fire took them, but every single second of footage up to that point was already sitting safely in cloud storage, timestamped with her face in full view. I must have watched it like 5 times. I went from devastated to a level of calm, focused anger that honestly scared me a little bit because I knew right then that she was done. She just didn't know it yet. I called my wife back and told her to sit down, and then I told her what I had. She was quiet for a long second and then she said, "Send me everything. I'm calling the fire marshal in the morning." My wife, by the way, is the real hero of this story. I was thousands of miles away, she handled everything. She drove down to the coast, met with the investigators and handed over the footage. I wish more than anything that I could have seen the investigators' faces when they watched it. My wife described it to me later. She said the lead investigator watched a clip of Diane with the gas can, paused it, took his glasses off, rubbed his eyes and said, "Ma'am, in 20 years I've never had one handed to me like this." Because here's the thing about arson cases, they're apparently really hard to prove usually. Fire destroys its own evidence. They almost never get the actual ignition on camera, with the suspect's face clearly visible. The investigator told my wife that their own analysis had already flagged the fire as suspicious because of accelerant patterns, so the footage matched their physical findings perfectly. However, it was not just a video, it was video that confirmed exactly what the burn evidence already showed. And Diane, bless her arrogant heart, had made it even easier. Wanna know where she bought the gas can and the gas? A station 50 minutes up the road on her own credit card the same week. There was also apparently a lovely conversation that she had with another neighbor about a month before the fire, where she had said, and the neighbor later repeated this to investigators, "That family doesn't deserve that property. Houses like that have a way of not lasting," she told on herself before she even did it, because people like Diane cannot help themselves. The cruelty is only fun if someone knows about it, and while all this was unfolding, Diane had no idea the footage even existed. In the days after the fire, she was playing the concerned neighbor. She gave a little interview to the local paper about how frightening it was. A fire so close to her home. She told another neighbor, "I just hope that poor family had insurance. Such old wiring in these original cottages." She was out there laying groundwork for the old wiring theory, while investigators already had a video of her doing a gas can lap around my house. And she even, and my wife only found this out later, sent a card to us. A sympathy card to my wife about the house. She sent a sympathy card for the house she burned down. My wife kept it. It got mentioned later in court, and apparently, I'm told it didn't help Diane's situation. The investigation moved fast given what they had. One morning, a few weeks after the fire, multiple vehicles pulled up to Diane's house and she was arrested in her bathrobe in her front yard. I was not there, my wife was not there, but the neighbors across the street was, and she called my wife, and according to her, Diane was actually screaming that she didn't do anything and that she was a respected member of the community and that they had no proof. The neighbors said one of the officers responded with something like, "Ma'am, we have video." And apparently, Diane just stopped. Mid-sentence, stopped screaming, stopped struggling, just went completely silent because in that 1 second she realized what the cameras must have done. The neighbor said that she watched the color drain out of Diane's face in real time. She told my wife, "I've never seen someone deflate like that, like someone let the air out of her." I got that update through my wife while I was still deployed, and I'm not gonna lie, I read that message probably 20 times and guys in my unit knew the whole saga by then. With the footage, the gas purchase, her statements to neighbors and the physical evidence all lining up, her lawyers did not have a lot to work with. There was some early noise about her claiming the video was not hers, which lasted right up until apparently everyone who had ever met her confirmed it was obviously her in her own jacket on her own walking route from her own back door. She got several years in state prison, actual prison time. A woman in her 60s who had spent her whole life being untouchable, who screamed at children and threw bikes in the ocean and never faced a single consequence before, finally found out that lighting a soldier's family home on fire while he is deployed is the kind of thing that makes prosecutors, judges and frankly the entire community want to see you in a jumpsuit. Oh, and by the way, it gets even better. Because the criminal case was only half of it, between the insurance company coming for her and our judgment against her, Diane's finances were obliterated, and here's the poetry: to pay what she owed, her house had to be sold. The one next to ours, the one she had kept all those years while scheming to get our lot and build her dream compound. She lost her freedom and her beach house, and we were made whole and kept our land. She set out to take everything from us, and the only person who lost everything was her. But here's the thing about a foundation, you can build on it again. It took a long time, insurance money, the civil judgment, a lot of paperwork, a lot of contractors, a lot of stress. But yeah, we rebuilt. And we rebuilt it bigger and better, and we put my grandpa's chimney right at the heart of the new house. And the new house? It is hurricane-rated, fire-resistant materials were possible, and a camera system that would make a casino jealous. Lesson learned forever. And yeah guys, if you ask me, people like Diane always rely on everyone around them being too polite, too tired, or too conflict avoidant to really make a paper trail, and she usually got away with screaming at renters, bullying kids, destroying property, and acting like OP's family had personally robbed her because OP inherited something that she wanted. And then she saw an empty house and thought that she had finally found the perfect moment. So yeah, I gotta say, I'm really glad that the cameras caught her, but this is a good reminder that nuisance behavior can turn into real danger when the person is obsessive enough like Diane in this story. Let me know what you think about this story in the comments, and now let's continue to some Reddit comments. And a user in the comments said, "For my insurance adjuster here, people don't realize how rare this actually is. I worked maybe 30 suspected arson claims in my career, and we got a conviction on like 4. Fire is the perfect crime, right until it isn't. The cloud footage in this case is what did it. 10 years ago, those cameras would have recorded to a local DVR that melted with the house, and then Diane walks free with an old wiring story that nobody can disprove. So in this case, she lost to a $200 per year subscription fee. Just incredible." And another user in the comments said, "I cannot fathom the level of arrogance it takes to wave at a security camera while committing a first-degree felony. It is incredibly satisfying that her obsession with stealing your grandfather's land is exactly what cost her her own house. Thank God you had the foresight to set up cloud storage in your case. Enjoy the new beach house, and I hope that you drink a beer on that new deck every year on the anniversary of her arrest." And the next one is another neighbor story, this time from r/malicious compliance, and is titled, "I want it to look nice around here." So I live in a very tenant-friendly area. We got rent control, and landlords are not allowed to do things like demand security deposits, enter the property without proper written notice, or include no pet clauses in leases, which renew automatically every month after a fixed term ends. For the last 11 years, my husband and I have had a great relationship with our landlord. Let's call him Joe, fake name. We've been very lenient in regards to repairs, and Joe was very forgiving when my husband and I both lost our jobs at the same time in 2016 and fell a few months behind on rent. We are now ahead on rent, but Joe is still very behind in maintenance and repairs. We got a whole laundry list of issues my landlord is aware of but hasn't done anything about for years, but we did not care because he left us alone and has been overall very kind to us. A few years ago, our landlord allowed us to start storing stuff in an old rundown shed in behind our rented portion of the yard. We never stored anything valuable out there because it's falling apart and squirrels have been using it to cache walnuts from the numerous walnut trees in our yard. We had an old barbecue, lawnmower, ladders and outside toys for my kids in there until recently. A few months ago, Joe shows up asking about the shed, wanting to know what we had stored out there, and I told him just some old junk we'll probably throw out soon. He told us that the family next door has a mouse problem, we don't, and he wants us to clear out the shed to prevent issues, and because I wanted to look nice around here. I said, okay, I'll talk to my husband and we will get it cleared out whenever we get a chance. I got an infant at home, so I cannot go out back and clean it myself unless someone else is here to watch the baby. My husband had scheduled surgery, so he wasn't able to do any heavy lifting until after he recovered, and admittedly, cleaning out the old shed was not a high priority, but then Joe sent me a passive-aggressive text. I just wanted to remind you that tomorrow is garbage day. We know garbage pickup has always been on Monday, and we need to work together to keep the rental property nice for everyone to enjoy. I replied asking him if he had plans to fix the shed, to remove his scrap pickup truck, or to remove his open compost piles and heaps of mixed concrete and scrap metal he has out by the shed that he wants us to clean. I also explained that my husband just had surgery and that we were not planning on cleaning the shed that day. Read it. He didn't like that. He showed up unannounced and walked inside and proceeded to yell at us in front of our children. He complained about his personal finances and the economy, inflation, property taxes and so on, and swore at us about our damn crap, told us we cannot use the shed anymore, and threatened to evict us because clearly you don't like living here and I can get way more for this house than what you're paying now. We told him to leave and that we will not communicate with him anymore unless in writing, and he said, "Fine, we will do it by the book from now on," and stormed out. The next day he put an eviction notice in our mailbox complaining that we have excessive garbage and waste in outbuildings, that we refuse to discuss this issue, and corrective action with the landlord, and even adding that he felt it was unreasonable given the fact that he didn't evict us for late rent back in 2016. The notice gives us 7 days to correct the issues, or else my landlord can file for an eviction hearing. The next day, while I cleaned out everything belonging to us, sand, the Walmart and squirrel poop from the shed, my husband got busy contacting local bylaw and the Rental Housing Enforcement Agency, aka the traffic cops for landlords, and he was given information on how to file against the landlord for refusing to do repairs, illegal entry, loss of an amenity, aka the shed, and harassment. After a surprise inspection that happened last week, we were given a report that said Joe was given 90 days to fix the roof, plumbing and weeping tile. He must demolish the shed and either erect a new shed or give us a rent reduction because the shed was apparently an assumed amenity. According to my neighbors with the mice issue, the provincial government is also involved now because apparently he filled in a pond without a permit, and now the fire department does not have a nearby water source in case of a fire, no hydrants out here, and the city, by law enforcement, threatened to fine him for every day that he leaves his large pile of broken concrete and rebar out back. The cherry on top, though, happened yesterday. He sent me a text to tell me that him and the plumber were gonna be there within the hour. Normally, I'd be okay with short notice, despite the law saying he must provide 24-hour written notice. Not this time, though. I told him we need 24-hour notice, and he showed up, knocked on the door, and when I reminded him that I won't speak to him in person anymore, he called the cops saying that I was being hostile towards him and he doesn't feel safe coming here. He sat outside for 4 hours waiting for the police, who later called me instead of showing up, and the officer who called said that Joe was told to stop harassing us and that he needs to provide 24-hour notice to enter the home, and he wanted to make sure Joe left and gave proper notice and asked me if I wanted an officer there tomorrow to keep the peace. If Joe does not do the repairs he's supposed to, we plan to take him to court and file for a rent reduction and for a lien to be put on the property so he cannot just sell it. We're just doing it by the book from now on and just want it to look nice. And the next one is titled r/malicious compliance. Manager insisted we log every single minute of non-billable time, so I did exactly that until payroll blew up. So I work at a consulting firm where billable hours are tracked like they are made of gold. A couple months ago, our new operations manager sent out a memo saying that any time not directly tied to a client project had to be logged in 15-minute increments under the new overhead category. She said it was to increase visibility and cut down on waste. Most people just rounded or ignored it after the first week, but she started auditing timesheets and calling people out in team meetings if their overhead bucket looked light. I decided to play it straight Every time I got up for coffee, used the bathroom, answered a quick Slack from another team, waited for a slow VPN, or even read an internal email that wasn't client-related, I stopped my timer and logged the exact minutes. Same thing for mandatory all-hands meetings, the weekly 30-minute sync that was basically just her reading the same slide deck, and the 10-minute walk to the printer when it jammed. I even started noting the 2 minutes it took to restart my laptop after forced Windows updates. After 3 weeks, my overhead total was sitting at 18.75 hours for a 40-hour week. My actual billable time, though, dropped below the 75% threshold the firm likes to brag about in recruiting. When payroll ran, my manager got flagged because my utilization report looked like I was barely working. She pulled me into a 45-minute meeting, which I logged as overhead, demanding to know why my numbers were so bad. I showed her the spreadsheet with every line item and timestamps, and she told me to use common sense going forward. I asked if that meant the policy was being updated, and she said no, just to be reasonable. Next timesheet, I kept the same level of detail but added a note at the bottom citing the original memo. HR ended up getting involved because 3 other people on my team started doing the same thing after seeing mine. Last I heard, the policy is still on the books, but nobody's been asked to produce their granular logs in weeks. My manager now avoids eye contact in the hallway. And yeah guys, I guess if you cannot baffle them with BS, just bury them in facts. Thank you for watching, I will see you again tomorrow.